The parents of a British known terrorist known as JIHADI Jack are wanting help from the Canadian government and politicians to help spring him from a prison in Syria to live a life of freedom here in Canada. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter and one of our regular contributors, Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, has anyone from Global Affairs Canada responded to this request?
Well, it would be public safety is the lead on this file, and so far they're being very non-committal. The father of Jack Letts, now Jack Letts is the man affectionately known in the media as JIHADI Jack. He is a Canadian citizen. He was born here, has lived in the UK for decades. He's coming to Ottawa next week to try and lobby MPs and senators to say, hey, look, my son needs to be sprung. He's a Canadian. Now, he's a Canadian by birth. He's never lived here. He was born, raised, educated in the United Kingdom. That's where he left from to go to Syria, to go join the Islamic State. And it is where I think he should return if the Kurdish jailers that are currently holding him in northern Syria want to let him go. But the Trudeau government, they've been asked about this before. They were asked about it just before the 2019 election. And all they would say is that, it's against the law for people to go and join groups like ISIS. And if somebody comes back, that they could be prosecuted. As I said, Mr. Letts, Jack Letts, has never lived here. Yesterday, Marco Mendicino, through a spokesperson, the current public safety minister, described how criminal prosecution could be in order, or peace bonds, or something else, if someone like Mr. Letts, he wouldn't get into any specific case, does come to Canada. They don't seem to be in any hurry to help him out. So I'm not sure that the parents will be getting a warm reception when they're in chilly Ottawa next week.
Brian, as the House of Commons prepared for a new session of hybrid parliament, the Deputy Speaker made kind of an odd request of MPs recently. What was it?
Well, I think you could sum it up as make sure you wear pants and don't go to the bathroom while your camera's on. We all remember the shenanigans of a Liberal MP last April, a guy named Will Amos. He decided not to run in the last election. I think the Liberal Party may have requested that he not run. He showed up naked on a session of hybrid parliament. He was on video camera and decided, he said, after a run to get changed. Well, MPs were shocked looking at their screens to see a naked man running by. I think any of us would be on a work meeting. Later on, about 6 weeks later, after he'd apologized and been embarrassed, he was caught relieving himself on camera. I'm not sure if he was peeing into a cup or a bottle or something, but he did this and again said, well, I didn't know. The MPs have to log in. There are multiple logins to get into the hybrid parliament. So the Deputy Speaker was reminding them, follow the decorum, make sure that you're dressed properly, make sure that you're wearing, if you're in the House of Commons and you have to wear a mask, that it's neutral, that you're not pushing a political statement or a brand, and just follow the rules, whether you're in person or via video conference. It shouldn't be that hard. They shouldn't need to be reminded, but obviously they did.
Now, the inflation crisis is driving up the price of everything, not just clothes. But when asked about it, what to do about it, because groceries are more expensive, clothing, rent, gas, the Trudeau Liberals only seem to have one answer, Brian: $10 a day daycare. So how will that really help seniors, single people, or those like myself who have adult children?
It won't help a lot of Canadians. I'm not sure why they think this is the answer. I mean, they do point out that inflation is a global problem, but there are steps that they could take inside Canada, including slowing down some of the government spending. Scotiabank has come out and said that. The chief economist at the Bank of Montreal, Doug Porter, has said that. This government has the foot on the accelerator of what is a global problem. So, that's why Canada has one of the highest inflation rates in the world. Everyone's dealing with it, but ours is higher, in part because of government spending, the Bank of Canada printing money, all of these measures that are in control of the government to some degree. They just answer with $10 a day childcare. Now, even if you have a kid who's 2 or 3, we're not going to get to the $10 a day childcare for 5 more years. You might see a reduction in cost next week or next year, but you're not going to see the $10 a day system. So your child will be in kindergarten or grade 1 when that comes in. On top of that, that doesn't really help you with the cost of everything else going up. So it's a bizarre strategy, but I just don't think that the government is in touch with where Canadians' heads are at on the issue of inflation. They seem completely out of touch. And it's not just the prime minister, who, as we've talked about before, is the definition of a trust fund baby. It's his entire government. These are the only talking points they put forward. And I don't know about you, Hal, but I have noticed the price of everything going up at the grocery store. Just the other day, I was looking at an item, and the sale price used to be the high price. Nobody's getting deals anywhere. And whether it is food, gas, natural gas to heat your home, rent, the cost of replacing things in your home, everything is going up. And the government just doesn't have a reasonable answer for it. They're seeming out of touch on this one.
You know, gas here in Lethbridge in southern Alberta is $1.45.9. What is it where you are in the nation, or in Toronto there? What is it right now?
It just dropped in Toronto to about $1.35 this week, but it had been in the $1.45 range. But it dropped about 10 cents this week, and we're expecting it to go up by another couple of cents over the next little while. I can't imagine what it's going to be costing out in places like BC, where they're dealing with the floods, they're dealing with the ports being cut off at different points, and the whole supply chain issue.
You know, when I worked in Parliament Hill, when you and I were on the Hill together there in Ottawa, and I remember asking Justin Trudeau in a media veil, you know, in a scrum, what would you consider middle class? And he says, well, Canadians who make $150,000 a year, that's considered middle class. I'm like, what? And all of us reporters kind of looked at each other stunned. So maybe that goes to say something about how potentially out of touch Mr. Trudeau may be with the average Canadian. Now, Brian, with the rise of the new COVID-19 variant Omicron, the Trudeau Liberals did something it has not done in the past. And what was that?
Well, they did what I think they should have done at the first wave, at the second wave, third and fourth, and that's close the airports quickly to flights coming in from areas of concern. Now, I'm not calling for a full border shutdown. We don't need to go back to that. But if we know that this new variant that we don't know a lot about, and we still don't, there are some reports that it's more transmissible, worries that it's more deadly. Some are saying, no, it presents milder symptoms. But the truth is, Hal, we don't know. So what we do know is that it was very present in 7 countries across Southern Africa. It has apparently spread, including to here in Canada, but they moved quickly on Friday to say, okay, we're going to limit travel from those regions. We're going to stop. There are no direct flights from South Africa, but they're going to stop people and flights coming in. So if you're on a connector that came in after this rule change, unless you were a Canadian citizen, you weren't getting in. If you were a Canadian citizen, you had to be tested and quarantined. These are measures that we may have to do now and again as these things pop up. And one thing that I'd recommend is that the federal government in Ottawa seriously look at what the British government is doing in the UK. They have what's called a red list. And if your country is put on the red list, automatically a whole set of protocols kick in. If you're coming into the country from a red list destination, then testing protocols kick in, quarantine protocols kick in. This is not the first time that we've had a huge spike. You remember when it was India and Pakistan? It's because suddenly the percent positivity, the case ratio was off the charts. It went from nowhere to off the charts. And a lot of people were coming in from those countries infected into Canada. Each time we do this in Canada, we have to come up with a new set of policy ideas and proposals. And the government was scrambling a bit on Friday. We need to adopt the British proposal. If you're you're coming in from a problem spot, you're put on that list. Here's what happens. And it's automatic. We need to head in that direction for the next time this comes up.
Now, the ban on unvaccinated travelers officially takes effect now. Brian, wasn't this supposed to actually come into effect about a month ago?
Yeah, we were all told it would happen by the end of October, but what we missed was the extension for another month. And, again, the Trudeau government campaigned hard on, we'll make sure travelers are vaccinated and you can't get on a boat, a plane, or a train unless you're double vaccinated. And then was a couple days after it was supposed to come in, I was talking to someone who just got off the flight, and they said, I was never asked. I didn't have to say a thing. Another person told me they just had to attest that they were vaccinated. But no, it kicks in now, November 30th, and goes on from here. We'll see how that changes. The Canada Border Services Agency has said that they have seized both fake tests and fake vaccination certificates at the border, hundreds of them. I'm sure that's just going to increase at this point. But yeah, if you thought it started at the end of October, you were wrong, just as I was.
Brian, a lot of Canadians can't stand the L word, which is lockdown. Let me ask you something. Are we potentially headed back into a lockdown situation in many regions of the country? I mean, European nations were already headed that direction before the new variant.
European nations were headed in that direction before the new variant for a variety of reasons. One, they have much lower vaccination levels than we do in Canada. And in some cases, their cases per 100,000. I was looking at Austria and Slovakia last week when this was an issue, and they were 27 and 23 times higher than Canada. So, that is a marked difference. We're not talking 2 or 3 times higher, 27 and 23 times higher with a lower vaccination rate. So that is going to create bigger problems for your healthcare system. I know that here in Ontario, some people, are already talking about we need to bring in more measures and we need to bring back measures that we've gotten rid of in capacity limits. The chief medical officer here, who he's quite surprised me actually, Dr. Kieran Moore has said, we don't want to go backwards unless we have to. We do not want to go backwards. So we'll pause on things. And so they paused the opening of nightclubs when cases started to rise, but they didn't reinstitute anything else. They just said, okay, nightclubs were supposed to go to full capacity, a couple weeks ago. We'll wait on that for now and see how things go. I think we need to understand what this new variant is before taking drastic measures. And the Canadian Medical Association put out what should be a warning to governments across the country to think before they act. We've talked a lot about the deaths caused by suicides, overdoses, missed medical treatments. They've now quantified that at about 4,000, and they've said that the medical system across the country needs an investment of $1.3 billion from the federal government to bring provincial spending back up to where it was pre-pandemic. So there are harmful side effects to a lockdown. We know more than we did when we first started this. Let's be smart about it. If we end up in a lockdown, let's hope it's only because there's no other option, such as hospitals actually being flooded and beyond capacity. We're not there yet. Let's hope we don't get there.
Brian, absolutely. We've noticed, since the start of the pandemic that depression and anxiety rates have gone through the roof. We've spoken to many health experts about that, including a lot of clinical psychologists. Brian, Canada and the United States continue to have ongoing trade irritants. And last week, the United States slammed Canada with yet another tariff. It doesn't appear as though the Biden administration really is a friend of Canada's.
Yeah, with friends like Joe Biden, who needs enemies? Because Justin Trudeau was just down there a couple of weeks ago. And of course, he was one of the big things that he was there for, and we talked about it at the time, was to try and put an end to these tax incentives that Biden wants to give to electric vehicles that have to be made in the United States. And there's worries that, this could really hurt Canada's auto industry. Well, they passed that the morning Trudeau was leaving Washington. They almost passed it while he was there at a fancy dinner. And Biden went to Detroit while Trudeau was in Washington to promote that very idea. A couple days after Trudeau gets back, they banned PEI potatoes over something that Canada has long said is not an irritant. Well, it was actually Canada. It was the Trudeau government that banned them because the Biden government said, if you don't, we will, and we'll take extra steps. And then last week, towards the end of last week, they doubled the tariff on softwood lumber. In 2006, this softwood lumber has been going on for decades, but in 2006, Stephen Harper was able to get a deal with the Bush administration in Washington. $5 billion was returned to Canadian producers in tariffs that had been taken. There was about a decade of peace. And then in 2015, when the agreement expired, Trudeau hasn't done anything. He hasn't been able to get a deal with Obama. He couldn't get a deal with Trump, and he can't get a deal with Biden. The only thing on this particular file that might save Canadian producers is you've got a lot of Americans dealing with their own inflation crisis, and Joe Biden just put up the cost of a new house because a lot of that softwood lumber goes into new home construction across the United States.
Brian, Barbados has officially become a republic and dropped Queen Elizabeth as the head of state. Now, an Angus Reid poll shows that many Canadians would back the same move for our country after Queen Elizabeth passes away.
Yeah, it's as high as 72% Quebec, which won't surprise anybody, but it is majority in the rest of the country that says when Queen Elizabeth passes, we're not really interested in carrying on with King Charles. And I don't think that's going to be a shock to an awful lot of people. Prince Charles has not endeared himself to an awful lot of people. I don't think movies like Spencer, which is in theaters now, generally help him. I don't think TV shows like The Crown generally help him. I will say that I was able to cover Prince Charles on a visit to Canada several years ago when he was visiting with veterans at the National War Memorial, and he quite surprised me how warm and engaged he was, how as soon as he was talking to any particular veteran, they had his undivided 100% attention. So he surprised me, but that's not a side most Canadians see. And women over the age of 55 are the most attached to the monarchy, but even they are less likely to be on board with continuing once Charles takes the throne.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.